Hi guys. Tonight we slip quietly through the centuries, stepping over time itself until the world around you feels damp, dark, and medieval. You can almost taste the smoke in the air, thick as soup, and feel the cold biting through the gaps in a timber wall that was never built to keep much of anything out, least of all a European winter. You are standing in a peasant's cottage, somewhere around the 14th century, maybe in England or France. It doesn't really matter, the misery of cold was fairly democratic back then. Your fingers ache, your nose stings, and your breath billows in front of you, glowing faintly in the flicker of a dying candle. You're already wondering how anyone survived this season without central heating, or even proper windows. Spoiler, most of them barely did. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are, so drop that in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, and imagine yourself stepping toward that faint orange glow, the only sign of life in a world gone cold. The door you close behind you isn't really a door at all, just a warped wooden board, swollen with damp, tied shut with something that used to be rope and now looks more like moss. Inside, a single candle sputters near the hearth. The air smells of damp wool, wood smoke, and the sharp sourness of old sweat. You can hear the faint rustle of straw on the packed dirt floor, where someone, maybe you, maybe a stranger, shifts in their sleep. In this world, privacy is a luxury even the Lord in his manor barely enjoys. Your eyes adjust slowly. The ceiling is so low you could brush it with your fingertips. Smoke gathers there, swirling in lazy ribbons because the chimney is little more than a hole hacked through the thatch. The smoke warms you. Oddly, it presses down like a heavy blanket, making the air thick and almost comforting once you stop coughing. Historians still argue whether that constant haze of smoke helped preserve the roof from insects or just hastened everyone's respiratory decline. Either way, no one could afford to care. The fire in the center is nothing grand, just a few glowing logs, maybe the last of today's gathering. Fuel was precious. Peasants couldn't wander freely into forests. That wood belonged to someone else, usually the kind of someone with enough soldiers to make sure you remembered it. So, you used what you had. Peat if you were lucky, dung if you weren't, bundles of twigs stolen from hedgerows when no one was looking. The smell of burning dung wasn't pleasant, but it was preferable to frostbite. You sit near the embers and stretch out your hands. The skin of your knuckles is cracked, and your nails are rimmed with dirt. The warmth feels almost alive, pulsing through your palms like something grateful to meet you. Behind you, under a heap of worn fabric and flattened straw, a child murmurs in sleep. You can't see much of their face, only the curve of a tiny cheek pressed against a bundled rag that passes for a pillow. Somewhere else, a chicken gives a soft cluck, shifting on its perch by the wall. You glance at it and think practically, not sentimentally, that its warmth is worth more than its company. There's no such thing as bedtime here, not really. You go to sleep when the light fades and rise when it returns, though in the middle of winter, that darkness stretches so long it bends the mind. Some villagers, you've heard, keep watch in turns, feeding the fire through the black hours. Others let it die, trusting that enough bodies huddled together can make up for the loss of flame. Historians still debate how often peasants froze in their sleep. It probably happened, though nobody wrote that sort of thing down. Death in a cottage didn't make the chronicles. The floor beneath you is hard, uneven, and smells faintly of the animals that sometimes share it. The thatch above creaks as the wind presses against it, rattling the wooden slats like teeth chattering in fear. You can almost imagine the wind whispering through the cracks, like a voice with old grievances. Outside, the snow lies deep, crusted with ice. It glows faintly in moonlight, a kind of silver stillness that feels holy and cruel at the same time. You remember, dimly, that people back then believed winter itself was a sort of punishment or cleansing, a divine silence meant to humble the proud and test the rest. In a way, it worked. You look around this small space. this world reduced to one room and a few breathing bodies, and everything feels sharper in the cold. Every movement matters, every sound carries. You hear the faint hiss of sap in the logs, the distant bark of a dog, or is that a wolf, and the rhythmic wheeze of someone older, sleeping too near the draught. It's strange how life shrinks to these small details, how each breath becomes something you guard carefully, like a coin. You shift closer to the fire, pulling a ragged blanket around your shoulders. The wool is coarse, itchy, but heavy with the smell of smoke and human closeness. It's oddly reassuring. You can almost forget, for a moment, that the world outside this hut is frozen solid. A mainstream historical fact. Most medieval peasants lived in what were called cruck houses, simple timber frames with wattle and daub walls and thatched roofs. They were built fast, repaired often, and designed for survival rather than comfort. Quirky though, archaeologists once found remnants of fish bones and shells under medieval cottage floors apparently. Some families used old oyster shells to reflect firelight and brighten the gloom. Clever, desperate, or both. You stretch out, imagining yourself lying on that straw bed. It's uneven, prickly, but better than the ground itself. You tuck your hands under your chin, breathe shallowly to avoid the smoke, and listen as the last ember cracks, sending up one final spark before the dark closes in. It's in this stillness that you begin to understand something: the strange intimacy of cold survival. You are closer to the others in this room than you might ever be to anyone in your modern world. You share warmth, breath, fear, and dreams. You exist together, pressed between frost and fire. Outside, the first light of dawn will soon touch the frost on the thatch, turning every droplet into crystal. But for now, you stay inside the half-silence, the shared body heat, the muffled world of sleep that smells of smoke and straw. You can almost feel yourself drifting, not into rest exactly, but into resignation, the soft acceptance that this is what life is. One long winter night, broken by firelight and hope. The light outside fades again, and the day never seems to properly arrive. The world feels half asleep, caught between dusk and dawn. You sit within that tiny house, knees drawn close, watching your breath float in front of you like a small ghost. The air is heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and stale smoke. This single room is your universe, the only place that stands between your body and the cold that could end it. The cottage is barely larger than a modern bedroom. The walls are made of woven branches coated with mud and straw, a pattern known as wattle and daub. It is rough to the touch, crumbly in spots where the frost has nipped at it. Gaps let the outside air in, and sometimes you can feel a thin ribbon of wind slither across your face while you lie in bed. The floor beneath you is packed dirt, uneven and cool, soft in some corners where years of spilled ale or animal waste have dampened it. Every sound inside this one-room home is amplified. The soft cough of your mother, the snore of your father, the bleating of a goat tethered near the wall. Privacy does not exist here. Everyone shares the same air, the same smells, and the same worries. The living, the dying, and the barely surviving are all pressed into one close space. Historians still argue whether this communal living strengthened family bonds or simply drove everyone quietly mad through sleepless proximity. In one corner, a rough wooden chest holds everything valuable: a few linen shirts, a bit of salt wrapped in cloth, a handful of coins if fortune has smiled. Beside it, a crude bench doubles as both table and bed for anyone too slow to claim a warmer spot. Near the door, straw is piled to insulate the gap where the wind creeps in. You can hear a soft movement nearby. Someone stirs beneath a heap of blankets made from wool, scraps of old clothing, and whatever could be stitched together. The warmth of another human is the greatest luxury in this frozen world. The body heat of 5 or 6 people in a single room can raise the temperature just enough to keep frost from forming on the inside of the walls. It is strange to think that your body, fragile as it is, becomes part of the house itself, an ingredient in its warmth. The ceiling above your head is dark and low, lined with rough beams blackened by years of smoke. Herbs hang drying there, suspended in the dimness. Lavender if you are lucky, wormwood or mint if you are not. They add a bitter scent to the air and help mask the smell of animals that share the house. In many villages, livestock sleep inside during the winter. The warmth of their bodies is more reliable than any fire. You might have a cow dozing nearby, its slow breath rising in little puffs. A hen might roost on a wooden rail by the hearth, feathers ruffling softly whenever someone moves. It is strange at first, sharing your sleeping space with animals, but in time it becomes part of the rhythm of life. You listen to their sounds like you would a lullaby. The clop of hooves shifting, the low grunt of a pig, the flutter of wings. A modern person might recoil from the smell or the filth, but to you it is comfort, proof that you are not alone in the night. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval peasant homes often combined human and animal living quarters. Archaeologists have found evidence of animal stalls built into the same structure as family sleeping areas. The heat from livestock could raise the interior temperature by several degrees, enough to make the difference between life and frostbite. A quirky detail. In some regions of Scandinavia, families even positioned the cow in the middle of the room, so that everyone could benefit from its body heat equally. It sounds absurd until you feel how bitterly cold it can get when the fire dies. You glance toward the single small window. It is not made of glass, which is far too expensive, but of stretched animal bladder or oiled linen. The material lets in a pale, filtered light and blocks some of the wind, though frost clings to it in feathery patterns. At night, the light from the hearth paints those patterns orange, like delicate webs. During storms, the window is sometimes stuffed with rags or straw to stop the drafts entirely. The family sleeps in shifts, in layers, in clusters. The oldest and youngest lie nearest the fire, the middle-aged near the edges. No one sleeps alone unless they are being punished or are gravely ill. Warmth is a form of mercy, and it is shared. You look around the space and realize that every object has a double purpose. A stool is also a step, a lid becomes a plate, a door plank serves as a table. Nothing is wasted because nothing can be. You move your hand along the wall and feel the chill seeping through it like breath. The structure groans when the wind pushes against it, reminding you that comfort here is temporary, borrowed. There is a faint, sweet smell coming from the hearth. Someone earlier in the day must have boiled porridge or cabbage. The residue has crusted on the rim of the pot and now caramelizes in the fading warmth. It is not pleasant, exactly, but it carries the memory of food, which in winter feels like a small miracle. Outside, the snow presses down on the roof, muting every sound. Inside, the stillness grows heavier. The only movement comes from the occasional flicker of the fire and the slow breathing of those around you. You feel the closeness of the air, thick with shared heat and moisture. Condensation forms on the beams and occasionally drips down onto a sleeper's face, waking them just enough to grunt and turn over. In this silence, you start to understand the kind of rest these people knew. It was not peaceful in the modern sense. It was survival. Sleep was a truce between exhaustion and necessity. The body gave in, not because it was comfortable, but because it had no other choice. Sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear the sound of rats scurrying under the straw. They live off the same grain as you, nibbling at anything edible. People once said rats carried whispers from the underworld, that their red eyes could see souls. Some villagers placed bits of iron near their beds to keep the creatures from nibbling at their toes. Historians still debate whether these superstitions came from pagan traditions or early Christian fears, but either way, you find yourself watching the shadows and wondering if the stories might be true. You pull the blanket closer around your shoulders and lie back against the straw. The air smells of smoke, earth, and sweat. But beneath that, there is something else. A faint sweetness of dried herbs and hay. You stare up at the dark beams above you, thinking how countless generations have slept in this same way, beneath the same kind of roof, through endless winters that came and went like waves. The house creaks, The fire sighs, and the rhythm of shared breathing fills the room. For a moment, it almost feels like peace. The fire is the pulse of this tiny world. Without it, nothing here can live. Not the people, not the animals, not even the fragile walls of the cottage. Everything depends on that small, flickering heart of orange light. You crouch closer, letting the glow touch your skin, feeling its gentle sting after the long chill. The fire is more than heat. It is time itself, marking the hours as the logs crumble into embers. When the flame dies, the night becomes endless. The hearth is not in the middle of the room by accident. It is the soul of the home, the meeting point where every meal, every prayer, and every story begins. The stones around it are blackened from years of smoke. Bits of charred wood scatter across the dirt floor. Above it, a simple iron hook holds a pot for boiling broth or porridge, and beside it sits a small bench where someone has left a wooden spoon, still sticky with dried oats. You reach out to adjust a log, and sparks drift up, catching in the smoke that pools near the roof. The air smells of oak and peat, a deep, earthy scent mixed with something animal, something human. It clings to your skin, seeps into your hair. Later, when you step outside, the cold air will bite at you, but you will still carry that smoky perfume, the scent of survival. It is hard to imagine life without matches, without a spark ready at hand. Fire-making here is a ritual, almost a prayer. Each morning someone must coax life from ash, using flint and steel, or even a glowing coal saved from the night before. It takes patience and breath, the careful blowing of lungs that have known too much smoke already. A spark catches, a curl of smoke rises, and at last the flame returns. It feels like a victory every single time. Historians still argue whether most peasants kept their fires going day and night, or let them die to save fuel. Some records suggest that the hearth burned continuously through the winter, tended by whoever woke during the night to stoke it. Others hint that it was allowed to fade, leaving the family to huddle in the cold until dawn. Either way, the fire was both a necessity and a danger. A single gust could scatter sparks into the thatch, and then everything you owned would vanish in minutes. You glance up toward the roof. The thatch above your head has dark streaks from past fires, stains left by the smoke that always finds its way into the rafters. The smoke never quite leaves the room. It crawls and drifts, settling into the pores of the walls. Some historians believe that the constant exposure to smoke may have helped preserve the thatch by keeping insects away. Others say it simply shortened lives. You sit in the middle of this debate, coughing softly, feeling both possibilities. Near the hearth sits a crude wooden cradle. Inside it, a baby stirs, wrapped in linen and wool. The soft crackle of the fire seems to calm it, as though the rhythm of flame is a lullaby it already knows by heart. The mother, half asleep, stretches a hand toward the cradle, touching it lightly to reassure herself. In this room, the fire warms every stage of life. The infant, the laborer, the old woman whose cough deepens with every season. It is the witness to everything that happens. A mainstream historical fact is that the medieval hearth often served as both stove and heater. Without separate chimneys, the smoke escaped through a vent in the roof, or simply through the thatch itself. Archaeological finds in rural cottages show darkened beams and soot layers several centimeters thick, proof of centuries of fires burning in open hearths. A more unusual detail comes from an Old English superstition. Some villagers believed that embers held spirits of the ancestors, and to let the fire die completely was to invite misfortune. They would leave a single glowing coal overnight, calling it the house heart, and cover it with ash to keep it alive until morning. A simple tradition, but one filled with quiet faith. You move closer to the warmth, watching the way the fire paints faces with light. Every flicker changes the world, turning fear into comfort, exhaustion into something like peace. Around you, others lie close, their forms outlined by the glow. Shadows ripple along the walls, almost alive. It is hypnotic, the dance of flame against the damp air. At times, the fire feels like a storyteller. Its voice crackles and hisses, retelling the same ancient tale of heat and hunger, of people trying to keep the dark at bay. The wind outside moans against the walls, but in here the light holds steady. You think of all the generations who have sat before a similar flame, faces lit from below, eyes reflecting that same trembling gold. Someone stirs in their sleep, murmuring words you cannot understand. The child in the cradle whimpers. A woman shifts, pulling her shawl tighter. You hear a faint rustle from the corner where a chicken scratches in the straw. The world is small but alive. Every sound echoes, wrapped in warmth and smoke. Your eyes follow the sparks as they drift upward, tiny embers rising toward the roof. They wink out one by one before they reach it, like little souls vanishing into the dark. You wonder for a fleeting moment, how many fires have burned here before this one? How many winters have been survived, barely, by the same simple dance of wood, air and breath? Then the wood pops, startling you. A bit of ash flutters down onto your hand, and you brush it away, feeling its dry, papery texture. You can almost imagine it as the remains of old stories, of people whose names are long forgotten. In this place, everything returns to ash eventually. You stretch your hands once more toward the flame, your skin glowing in the light. The warmth seeps into your fingers, into your bones. For a moment, the cold world outside seems far away. It is enough, for now, to be alive beside the hearth, breathing the same smoky air that has kept people alive for centuries. Night deepens, and the warmth from the fire fades. The house smells faintly of smoke and earth, and as you move your hand along the straw bedding, you realize just how fragile comfort is here. The mattress beneath you is nothing more than a sack stuffed with hay, reeds, or whatever dry material could be found before the frost came. The texture is uneven and sharp. Each stalk scratches your skin through the thin linen shift you wear. Still, it is softer than the bare floor, and after a day of labor in the fields, even this rough bed feels like mercy. Bedding is not an object of luxury. It is a mark of survival. The straw is changed a few times a year if you are fortunate. Most families wait until spring, when the smell becomes unbearable, or the vermin too bold. You can almost hear the faint patter of fleas hopping in the silence, invisible but always near. You scratch without thinking. Everyone does. Archaeological evidence suggests that medieval peasants used what were called pallets or trusses of straw, bundled together and laid over wooden boards or directly on the dirt floor. Linen sheets, if they existed at all, were rare and precious, passed down for years. Some people mixed dried herbs into the straw, hoping the scent of mint or lavender might discourage insects. The scent never lasted long, but the belief offered comfort, and comfort could be a kind of hope. Curiously, there are records of people using ash or crushed fern leaves in their bedding, thinking it would drive away lice. Others sprinkled salt or even soot beneath the mattress as a charm. These practices sound strange now, but when every itch could turn into infection, superstition often carried more weight than reason. You shift again, and the straw crackles beneath you, a soft whisper in the dark. Nearby, the child turns over, still half asleep, and a soft sigh escapes. You can smell the mixture of wool, smoke, and sweat that fills the air. There is no sharp division between cleanliness and filth in this place. It all blends together into one familiar atmosphere, dense but somehow reassuring. You grow used to it, the way sailors grow used to salt. The straw bed itself has a nickname among peasants, the bones of the earth. It connects you to the soil you work every day. You can feel that truth in the way the straw pokes through the fabric, reminding you that the ground is never far away. Comfort here is fleeting, and yet there is something honest in its simplicity. The idea of owning a mattress stuffed with feathers or wool belongs to the wealthy. Only lords and merchants can afford such things. For you, a sack of straw is a treasure. You might add a rough blanket made of coarse wool, heavy and itchy but warm enough to hold back the worst of the cold. Beneath it, you curl into yourself, tucking your hands beneath your chin. The smell of smoke lingers in the fabric, the same smoke that stains your ceiling and your lungs. Historians often mention how people shared their bedding not only for warmth but also for protection. A lone sleeper was a vulnerable one. Thieves, rats, or worse could find them easily. It was safer to rest beside others, to wake at the same sounds, to breathe the same heavy air. Sleep was not a private act, it was a collective one. In one corner, you notice a small pile of discarded straw, flattened and grey. It is the old bedding, swept aside when new material was brought in. Mice rustle through it, their tiny feet tapping lightly against the wall. You watch them for a moment, thinking of how life and decay share the same space here. Everything returns to the earth in time, even the bed you lie on. There are old sayings about straw, little fragments of rural wisdom that survive in whispered prayers. Some say that placing a sprig of holly beneath your bed keeps away nightmares. Others claim that if you dream of green straw, you will have a good harvest. Such sayings feel distant now, half lost in smoke and sleep, but perhaps they once helped people believe they had some control over their hard world. You shift again, trying to find a comfortable spot. The straw rustles loudly. You can feel the dust rising around your face, catching the faint light of the fire. Your throat burns a little, dry from breathing the smoke-filled air. Still, your eyes grow heavy. The sound of breathing fills the room, slow and steady. Someone coughs softly. A chicken flutters its wings. The rhythm of these tiny noises lulls you. A detail from early church records tells us that peasants often slept in their work clothes during winter. It saved the trouble of dressing again in the morning and kept them slightly warmer during the night. You might feel the rough wool against your skin, scratchy but comforting. Beneath you, the straw creaks as you move, and you can feel the cold seeping upward from the floor. The body learns to ignore it. Researchers have long discussed whether peasants considered their straw beds temporary or normal. Some accounts suggest that people of the time accepted discomfort as natural, never longing for soft pillows they had never known. Others think they dreamed, even then, of something gentler. It is strange how the human body can grow used to hardship and still keep space for dreams. You reach out and feel the straw beneath your fingers, each piece brittle and dry. The fire gives a small sigh, a pop of wood, and the light fades again. You think of how fragile everything is in this place. The bed, the fire, even sleep itself. Yet somehow, night after night, people closed their eyes here and woke again, still breathing, still enduring. The straw whispers beneath you, and the cottage settles into silence. The smell of earth fills your lungs, grounding you in another century. For a moment you feel the strange peace that comes from exhaustion, from knowing you have done all you can for the day. You let your eyes close, the straw cradling you in its rough embrace, and listen as winter hums softly outside the thin walls. You wake before dawn, though the darkness outside looks the same as midnight. The air inside the cottage has grown even colder, as if the fire's last breath slipped away sometime during the night. You can see your own exhale drift upward in faint clouds. The blanket around your shoulders feels stiff with frost along its edges. Still, you pull it tighter, tucking your chin into the coarse fabric, because warmth here is not just comfort but life itself. The clothing you wear to bed is almost the same as what you wore all day. Few people can afford separate garments just for sleeping. Beneath the outer layers of wool, you might have a simple linen shirt, threadbare at the seams, and over that, whatever you can pile on. A tunic, a cloak, sometimes even your shoes if the cold bites too deep. There is no softness in these fabrics, no silk or velvet. The wool is scratchy, the linen rough, and both carry the smells of smoke, animals, and sweat. Yet each layer traps a little more heat, and that is all that matters. Records from the period show that peasants often owned just one or two sets of clothing, A heavy cloak or mantle was precious, sometimes more valuable than the tools used in the fields. It was passed down through generations, patched again and again, until the fabric no longer held a stitch. During the long nights of winter, people slept wrapped in whatever they had left. Even the old sacks used to carry grain might be sewn into makeshift covers. Curiously, there are stories from some villages describing how families would hang their damp outer clothes above the sleeping area to dry overnight. The warmth of the sleeping bodies, combined with the faint heat from the hearth, would slowly drive out the moisture. In the morning, the garments would be stiff but wearable again. It was a practical solution, though it filled the small room with the sour smell of wet wool. You shift slightly and feel how heavy the layers are on your body. The clothes make movement difficult, but they also create a strange sense of safety. The weight feels protective, like armor against the cold world. Each layer is a memory of labor. The tunic worn to harvest grain, the cloak mended after a storm, the hood borrowed from a neighbor. You wear your life to bed, literally. Not far from you, someone mutters in their sleep. The faint shuffle of feet suggests another body stirring near the fire. Perhaps they are rising to coax the embers back to life. You hear a few soft blows, the faint scrape of iron, and then a sigh of smoke as sparks catch once more. The room slowly fills with the warm orange pulse of renewed flame. In this half-light, you see the glimmer of frost on the wall, like tiny crystals breathing with the heat. Your fingers are numb, and when you stretch them toward the fire, they sting with sudden warmth. The wool on your sleeve gives off a faint, bitter scent as it warms, the smell of old lanolin and smoke mixed together. According to accounts from medieval household manuals, many people believed it was dangerous to sleep fully unclothed, even if warmth allowed it. The night was thought to be a time of wandering spirits and illness carried on cold air. To keep your body covered was to protect it not just from the chill but from unseen forces. Superstition and survival blended easily in such a world. There were also practical beliefs tied to clothing. Some peasants would wrap their feet in rags soaked with animal fat, hoping to prevent frostbite. Others stuffed wool scraps into their shoes. A few texts mention sleeping caps made from scraps of fabric or animal hide, tied beneath the chin. These humble inventions kept body heat from escaping, though they also left greasy marks on the hair by morning. You can almost feel the stiffness of those garments, the way they rub against your neck or dig into your elbows, yet you would not dare remove them. The moment the air touches your skin, the cold bites sharply, like a blade pressed against you. So you keep still, letting the weight of the cloth lull you back toward drowsiness. The child across the room begins to whimper, maybe dreaming or simply cold. A parent murmurs softly, shifting closer. You watch the faint outlines of figures moving beneath their layers of blankets and cloaks, a pile of shapes rising and falling in rhythm. There is a kind of tenderness in it, even without words. Everyone in this room depends on everyone else. One chronicler from the 13th century described winter nights as a siege laid upon the poor. You can see why. The battle is fought not with swords but with scraps of wool and shared heat. Every piece of cloth, every patch, every thread becomes a shield. And when morning finally comes, survival feels like victory. Experts today continue to discuss how peasants balanced function and modesty in their clothing. Some think warmth outweighed all social conventions in the coldest months, while others believe even then, propriety held strong, especially in mixed company. Whatever the truth, you suspect that when frost bit through every layer, shame lost its place quickly. The fire crackles softly, throwing light across your face. The air grows just warm enough to make you relax. You notice how the smoke curls upward in thin ribbons, vanishing into the dark roof beams. The light touches the walls, revealing the texture of dried mud and straw, the imprints of countless hands that shaped it long ago. Every mark tells a story of survival, of bodies that refuse to yield to winter. As the warmth seeps back into your hands, you pull your blanket closer and rest your head on your arm. The sounds of the house return to their slow rhythm, the creak of the beams, the sigh of the fire, the steady breathing of those who still sleep. You close your eyes again, sinking into that rhythm, wrapped in all the fabric and memory your small world can offer. The night stretches long, but not everyone sleeps through it. You stir awake sometime past midnight, and the air has turned brittle again. The fire is little more than a red glow, its warmth faint and uneven. Around you, bodies are pressed close together beneath blankets and cloaks. Someone's breath touches your cheek, warm and slow. You can hear the faint murmur of sleep, the kind that comes from exhaustion more than comfort. Sleeping together is not a matter of affection, it is necessity. You share heat, not space. The more bodies there are, the better the chance that everyone wakes alive. In this room there are at least 6 of you. Parents, children, perhaps a grandparent, and sometimes even a traveller passing through who has been given a corner of the floor. Hospitality is a dangerous kindness, yet it remains a rule of peasant life. A body is warmth, and warmth is life. Accounts from medieval manors reveal that poor families often slept in shared beds or on the same straw mattress. It was practical, economical, and ordinary. There is no shame in it. In fact, some church records mention that sleeping apart was considered strange or even unhealthy in rural communities. The night belonged to many, not to one. Curiously, written accounts from northern Europe mention travellers being invited into peasant homes on bitter nights and offered a place in the family bed. It was not seen as improper, but as an act of mercy. In the harshest winters, refusing warmth to another person was viewed as cruelty. You can imagine the awkward shuffle as strangers arranged themselves among the family, trying not to disturb sleeping children, each silently grateful for the closeness that meant survival. The air is heavy with the smell of sweat and smoke. Someone coughs softly. A chicken rustles in its corner. You can feel the straw shifting under the combined weight of so many people. Every movement makes the others stir slightly, a wave of rustling fabric and soft breathing. There is a rhythm to it, like the tide moving in and out. The heat of other bodies seeps into your skin, a kind of shared pulse. You can feel the warmth at your back, the slow rise and fall of another chest, the faint brush of wool against your neck. The closeness feels strange at first, but as your body relaxes, you realize it also feels safe. Alone, the cold would claim you by morning. Together, you become a single breathing creature made of many hearts. In some regions, families built low sleeping platforms or box beds against the wall to conserve heat. These wooden frames enclosed the sleepers like a cradle, trapping body warmth within. Archaeologists have found remnants of such constructions in rural homes, worn smooth by generations of use. The walls of the bed itself became warm to the touch, absorbing heat from those who slept inside. There are stories from Brittany and the Scottish Highlands describing how entire households, from children to grandparents, huddled in these box beds through the night. In some tales, even a newborn's cradle was tucked inside the same enclosure, so the baby could share the warmth of everyone else. You picture it now, a dark wooden space filled with slow breathing and dreams. There is still disagreement among social historians about how common this closeness truly was. Some believe these shared beds represented the peasant world's communal values. Others think it was simply the only way to survive when fuel was scarce. Whatever the reason, the result was the same: a web of bodies breathing life into one another through the endless cold. You lie awake, listening to the mixture of sounds. The man beside you snores softly, the rhythm of his breath echoing in the quiet. A child mumbles in sleep, perhaps caught in a dream. The air is thick and warm where the blankets hold in the heat, yet cold where it escapes. You adjust slightly, careful not to wake anyone. The wool scratches your neck, but the pressure of another shoulder near yours steadies you. It is in this shared space that small acts of care unfold. Someone reaches out in their sleep to adjust a child's blanket. Another shifts closer when a cough rattles through the dark. It is not comfort in the modern sense, but it is tenderness born of necessity. Every person in this room holds a part of everyone else's warmth, like a quiet promise. You think for a moment about how strange it might seem to people centuries ahead, who sleep alone in wide beds, surrounded by silence. Here, loneliness would be unthinkable. Even your dreams are shared, tangled with the sounds and warmth of others. Perhaps that is why people of this time rarely feared the dark. They were never truly alone in it. From outside, the wind presses against the walls, and you can hear it whistling through small cracks. The cold tries to creep in, but it cannot quite reach you. You feel the steady warmth of bodies on either side, their breathing deep and rhythmic. The smell of wool and wood smoke fills your lungs until it becomes something soothing, something almost sacred. Some folklorists have suggested that this closeness fostered a kind of silent communication among peasants. Without light or privacy, people learned to read one another's movements and breathing as easily as speech. A turn of the body, a sigh, or a cough could say more than words. In that way, the bed became not only a place of sleep but of understanding. You close your eyes again and let the sound of the fire lull you. The warmth spreads slowly, and your thoughts drift. Perhaps someone long ago felt this same stillness, lying in this same kind of house, listening to the same winter wind. You are part of a long chain of sleepers, bound not by time, but by the shared rhythm of breath and survival. Outside, the snow continues to fall, soft and endless. Inside, the room breathes. You can almost feel the centuries between you and them dissolve, leaving only the simple truth of warmth shared in the dark. You wake again sometime in the middle of the night, but it does not feel like morning yet. The fire has died to quiet embers, and the air has that heavy stillness that settles only when everything alive is sleeping. You blink, disoriented, and notice that a faint grey light seeps through the small window, too dim to be dawn. For a moment, you think something is wrong. Then you remember what people of this age already know by instinct. The night itself comes in two parts. In the medieval world, sleep often arrives in halves. The first stretch begins not long after sunset, when exhaustion pulls you down quickly. Hours later, sometime after midnight, you wake naturally for a short while before drifting into what people call the second sleep. No one finds this strange. It is simply how the rhythm of dark and cold dictates life. You stretch quietly, careful not to disturb the others who still lie in a tangle of blankets and limbs. Evidence from surviving letters and household notes suggests that this pattern was common across Europe. People would wake for an hour or two during the long winter nights, tending to small tasks, checking the fire, or simply sitting in silence. The break between sleeps was a time of calm reflection. Some used it to pray, some to whisper, others to nurse infants or mend clothes by firelight. The body followed the natural length of night, dividing rest into two separate dreams. Curiously, early physicians believed that the period between sleeps was healthy for the soul. It was said to clear the mind and settle the stomach. People called it the watch or the waking hour. A few even took it as a time for conversation, sharing quiet talk while the world outside lay frozen and silent. Imagine the hush of that hour, the fire glowing faintly, someone whispering a story or a prayer, the rest of the family sleeping like shadows around you. There is still disagreement among modern researchers about why this pattern faded. Some argue that artificial light changed the rhythm of human rest, stretching the day until sleep condensed into one solid block. Others think that the old two-part sleep was never a rule at all, just a habit shaped by the long winter dark. Whatever the reason, you can feel the logic of it here. The night is too long for one dream alone. You rise quietly and move toward the hearth. The ground feels cold beneath your bare feet, the packed earth leaching warmth from your skin. You stir the ashes with a stick, uncovering a few small coals still alive beneath the grey dust. A faint red glow spreads outward, and the fire seems to sigh in recognition. You add a handful of twigs, blowing gently until the first thin flame curls upward. The sound wakes an old man sleeping nearby. He lifts his head and watches you with bleary eyes. For a moment, neither of you speak. Then, in a voice soft as worn cloth, he mutters something about the wind and rolls closer to the fire. You pass him a piece of cloth to drape over his shoulders. There is no need for thanks. In this world, small gestures replace grand words. You sit beside the fire and listen. The sounds of the house are a kind of music. Someone snores gently in the corner. The fire pops. Outside, snow slips from the roof with a muted thud. The air smells of damp wool and burning wood, familiar and grounding. You close your eyes for a moment and feel how time slows here. Each breath stretches out, unhurried, as though the world itself is half asleep. A record from a monastery in France describes monks rising between their two sleeps to recite prayers in the darkness. The villagers nearby sometimes followed the same rhythm, though their prayers were less formal. They might whisper charms to keep the livestock healthy or to ward off frost. The middle of the night, in this thinking, was a sacred pause when the world hung between two states of being, dream and waking, death and life, silence and song. Oddly enough, some old tales warn against venturing outside during this time. The hours between first and second sleep were said to belong to spirits wandering the roads or to the souls of those recently dead. Peasants would stay indoors, the doors barred, and the fire tended low. It was not fear so much as respect for the unseen. Even now, as you sit watching the faint flicker of light, you can feel how the dark outside presses close. Listening. You lean back, stretching your legs toward the warmth. The flicker of the fire paints the walls in soft waves of orange and shadow. For a while, you just breathe, letting the silence settle into you. The weight of the day fades. In this fragile calm, you can almost hear your own heartbeat keeping time with the slow crackle of the fire. Somewhere behind you, a small voice whispers. It is a child, half awake, asking if morning has come. You murmur a quiet answer, one that means both yes and no. There is comfort in such uncertainty. The child sighs and drifts back into the slow rhythm of second sleep. You listen as their breathing merges again with the others. You remain awake a little longer, watching the embers pulse. Outside, the wind carries a faint whine, a reminder of the endless cold. Inside, warmth lingers just enough. Eventually, your own eyes grow heavy again. You lie down beside the others, drawing the blanket to your chin. The room feels different now, softer, quieter, as if the night itself has drawn closer to protect you. Slowly, you drift into that second, deeper sleep. Your last thought before dreams take you is that this rhythm feels ancient, older than any clock or calendar. It belongs to the pulse of the earth itself, guiding all who live by the light of fire. By the time the pale light of morning begins to touch the window, the air inside the cottage has already changed. It feels warmer than it should, and you realize it is not just the small fire that makes it so. The animals have woken. The quiet sounds of breathing and shuffling fill the room. You hear the soft lowing of a cow, the snort of a pig, the faint cluck of hens scratching at the floor. You open your eyes to see shapes moving slowly in the dimness, steam rising from their bodies in the cold air. In many peasant homes, the animals slept under the same roof as the family. It was not simply because of affection, though you might imagine a child hugging a chicken or a farmer speaking gently to his cow. It was practicality. The body heat of animals could raise the temperature of a single-room cottage by several degrees, enough to make the difference between life and frost. A family with one cow might live warmer than a family without. Archaeological evidence from rural England and parts of Scandinavia confirms that animals often occupied the same structure as people, sometimes separated only by a low partition or even just a line of stones. In these spaces, the household was one community of breath and warmth. The smell was powerful, thick with straw, manure, and hay. It was not pleasant by modern standards, but in a winter that froze rivers solid, that smell meant safety. Old writings from the 15th century mention that families sometimes brought their youngest livestock indoors during the harshest months. Calves and lambs might sleep near the hearth, wrapped in rags or placed in wooden troughs to keep them from the chill. The sound of their breathing blended with that of the family. The house became a small barn of life and warmth. You rise carefully and step over the straw-covered floor. The cow turns its heavy head to look at you, eyes dark and steady. Its breath steams in the light from the window. You can almost feel the heat radiating from its body. A few hens cluck quietly, scratching for bits of grain that have fallen near the hearth. One pecks curiously at your foot before wandering away. The smell is strong enough to sting your nose, yet the longer you breathe it, the more it becomes part of you. The scents of animal and smoke and human sweat mix together until they seem one and the same. In this world, separation between species is thin. All of you are bound by the same struggle against cold and hunger. A curious detail recorded in several rural diaries tells how some families gave their animals nicknames and treated them almost as household members. Cows were spoken to kindly before milking. Pigs fed scraps from the family's table. One account even describes a child naming the family goat after his grandmother, a gesture both affectionate and mischievous. It is hard to tell where necessity ended and fondness began. You sit near the hearth again, watching the steam curl from the backs of the animals. The air feels heavy with life. The cow shifts her weight, hooves pressing into the dirt, and the soft jingle of her harness echoes faintly. A pig snorts, rolling onto its side in the straw, perfectly at home. These creatures are not guests but partners in survival. There is still debate among rural historians about how people managed hygiene in such crowded living conditions. Some argue that the proximity of animals increased disease, while others believe the warmth and constant airflow from open vents actually reduced illness. Whatever the truth, the people of that time accepted this closeness as normal. To them, the barn and the bedroom were two halves of one life. You look toward the ceiling where bunches of herbs hang drying, a faint attempt to sweeten the air. Sprigs of rosemary and thyme sway slightly whenever the cow moves. The smell of smoke from the fire mixes with their sharp scent, creating an odd kind of fragrance, earthy and comforting. You imagine how this blend would cling to your hair, your clothes, even your dreams. Some villagers believed animals could sense approaching storms or even death. If the hens clucked restlessly at night or the cow refused to lie down, it was taken as a warning. A few people would whisper charms or prayers to calm them, believing that frightened animals could attract ill fortune. The line between superstition and experience blurred easily when the night was long and the world seemed alive with hidden meanings. You watch as the cow lowers her head to drink from a wooden bucket, the sound of water echoing softly. The movement is slow and deliberate, each gulp followed by a deep breath that mists the air. There is something ancient in that rhythm, a reminder that warmth and life depend on the simplest acts. As the morning grows brighter, you notice the thin layer of frost melting from the window. Tiny droplets slide down the oiled linen, catching the light. You feel the room come alive in that faint golden glow. Children stir under the blankets, and someone begins to feed the fire with another handful of sticks. The day begins not with silence, but with the sounds of life sharing a single roof. An old proverb from the Low Countries says, "A cow in the house keeps the devil from the door." It is hard to know whether that meant protection from evil or simply protection from cold, but perhaps both were true in their way. Here, in this small room, warmth is sacred, no matter where it comes from. You sit quietly, feeling the heat from the animals reach you in gentle waves. The fire crackles softly, the smell of hay fills your lungs, and for a moment, the world outside the cottage seems to fade away. Everything that matters is here. The breath of beasts, the glow of flame, the promise of another day survived. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the slow, steady sounds of life. The warmth presses softly against your skin. It is not the comfort of luxury, but the quiet triumph of endurance. You take one more deep breath, the air thick with the mingled scent of smoke and fur, and you understand why, in this frozen age, sharing your bed with a cow or a hen might not feel strange at all. It might feel like grace. When darkness falls again, you begin to understand how alive the night can be in a place so small. The firelight trembles across the walls, and the cold wind hums through the gaps in the thatch. Outside, snow crunches under unseen feet, and inside, every sound grows louder in the stillness. The cottage is never truly silent. Even in sleep, the world continues to whisper. You lie back on the straw and listen. The noises come one by one, blending into a rough sort of lullaby. A cow shifts its hooves near the wall, the rope on its neck scraping softly against wood. A log settles in the fire with a muted crack. Someone in the darkness coughs, turns over, sighs, then falls quiet again. The room breathes with you. Sound travels differently here. The walls of mud and straw do not muffle much, so you can hear the night outside almost as clearly as the one inside. Far off, a dog barks once, sharp and short, before fading into the distance. Closer, an owl hoots, slow and haunting, the call stretching over the frozen fields. You picture its wings brushing through the snowflakes as it hunts for mice near the barns. Written accounts from rural villages mention that winter nights were often filled with noises that reminded people how thin the barrier was between safety and danger. The howl of wolves, the creak of trees, the snapping of ice on the river, all mixed together into what one monk poet described as the language of cold. Even the wind seemed to speak. People learned to recognize its moods, whether it carried warning or mercy. Curiously, some old beliefs claimed that wind slipping through a crack could carry voices from spirits or the souls of the lost. Families would stuff gaps in the walls with moss or straw, not only to block drafts, but also to keep out the whispers of the dead. When you lie awake now, listening to that faint sigh of air, you can imagine why such stories took root. You hear the chickens murmuring softly on their perch, their feathers rustling like dry leaves. They are restless tonight, perhaps sensing something in the air. The cow gives a low groan, deep and patient, before settling again. Beside you, a child stirs and mutters in its sleep. The rhythm of these sounds weaves together into something strangely calming. The smell of smoke still hangs in the air, thicker now because the fire burns low. You breathe through it and taste ash on your tongue. Above, the beams creak as frost tightens outside. Every sound has its place. The smallest crack or rustle draws your attention. It is both comfort and warning, reminding you that the world never truly rests. According to some chroniclers, peasants used to tell stories during these late hours, partly to pass time and partly to drown out the noises that made sleep uneasy. These were not tales of kings or saints, but of familiar things that had turned strange: talking animals, lights in the marshes, footsteps heard where no one walked. Such stories tied fear and wonder together, like threads in a single cloth. The animals shift again. You hear the faint clatter of hooves and the rustling of straw. The sound of breathing, both human and beast, fills the space until it feels alive in every corner. You can almost feel the rhythm of it pressing against your skin, steady and ancient. Experts who study rural life often note how attuned peasants were to the noises of their surroundings. A crack in the night could signal danger, a sign that the door latch had loosened or that snow had fallen too heavily on the roof. The ear became a tool of survival. Even in sleep, the body listened. Outside, the wind rises. It slips around the cottage in soft moans that sound almost human. The sound makes your heart quicken for a moment, and you draw the blanket closer to your chin. You remind yourself that it is only the wind, only the frozen air moving through the trees. Yet the imagination in such darkness is quick to wake. There are old songs about winter spirits that wander between houses, invisible but heard in the sighing air. Peasants sometimes hung bits of iron above the door to keep them away. The sound of the wind rattling those charms would mix with the other noises of the night, until the boundaries between fear and faith blurred completely. You breathe slowly, focusing on the quiet rhythm of your own chest. The fire pops once, scattering a few sparks, and the sudden noise feels almost loud enough to fill the world. Then the sound fades, leaving only the heartbeat of the cottage again. You realize how differently silence feels here. It is not absence but presence, a living thing that breathes along with everything else. The cold presses harder against the walls, and the timbers creak in reply. A drop of condensation falls from the ceiling onto your cheek. You wipe it away and settle deeper into the straw. The smell of damp wool mixes with the smoke, and you can hear faint breathing all around you. You wonder how many nights like this have passed in this same kind of room, how many generations have listened to the same chorus of sound and darkness. Slowly, your eyes begin to close again. The noises blend into a single, soft hum, a melody of life contained in one fragile space. Outside, the snow falls soundlessly, thickening the world's silence. Inside, warmth lingers in the air, held together by breath and fire and the patient sounds of living things. You let yourself drift into that sound, carried along like a leaf floating in the wind. The night fades into morning with a shiver that moves through the walls. You open your eyes and see your breath again, small clouds of mist dissolving in the cold light. The fire has died entirely this time, leaving only grey ash and a faint smell of wood. Frost creeps along the inside of the walls like veins of white lace, and droplets hang frozen from the ceiling beams. When you touch one, it breaks off in your hand like glass. Inside this single room, the cold feels alive. The air burns your throat when you breathe too deeply. Every sound seems sharper, clearer, as if the frost has stripped away warmth and left only edges. The floor beneath your feet feels almost like stone. You stamp them a little, trying to bring back the feeling, and the sound echoes in the small space. Surviving winter in such a house is a constant battle against the cold that never truly loses. The walls are thin, and the roof leaks heat like a sieve. You can block the door with straw, patch the gaps with rags, and still the wind finds its way in. Records from medieval manorial accounts describe the constant maintenance required to keep these cottages livable. Each year, families patched the thatch, sealed the daub, and prayed the structure would hold until spring. Oddly enough, traces of soot and frost found in excavated dwellings show how uneven the temperature could be inside. The upper air might be filled with choking smoke, while the lower half of the room stayed near freezing. People learned to live in this strange balance, their heads warm and their feet numb. It was not comfort, but it was life. You glance toward the small window. The oiled linen that serves as glass is rimmed with ice. The faintest sunlight leaks through, turning the frost into patterns of silver and pale blue. You can see where the warmth of your own breath has melted a small circle clear, your tiny claim against the winter world. Historians who have studied rural life describe how peasants layered everything they owned against the cold. Blankets, rags, and even old grain sacks hung on walls to trap heat. Some burned bundles of rushes for light instead of candles, because they also added a trace of warmth. Yet for all these small measures, frost often formed indoors. Children woke with frozen hair, and the water in the bucket beside the fire turned solid overnight. You move closer to the hearth, poking at the ashes in hope of hidden coals. There are none. You take up a flint and steel, striking until a spark catches in the dry moss you keep in a small clay pot. The fire comes back slowly, weak at first, then growing into a thin orange flame. The warmth feels fragile, almost shy. You hold your hands out, palms tingling as life returns to your fingers. It is in moments like this that you realize how deeply people of this time depended on fire, not only for warmth, but for morale. The glow of the flame is as much comfort to the mind as to the body. Chronicles from monastic observers mention how peasants measured their evenings by the strength of the fire. A bright blaze meant hope, dim embers meant despair. A curious observation recorded by a cleric in the 14th century tells of peasants keeping a small pot of hot stones near their beds. Heated in the fire, the stones were wrapped in cloth and tucked under blankets to provide warmth through the night. Simple, clever, and surprisingly effective. You imagine the brief luxury of heat against cold toes, the kind that feels like a blessing. Yet the same warmth carried danger. Fires were unpredictable, especially in small homes where the floor was dry straw. Accidents were common. One careless ember could turn a winter refuge into an inferno. Villagers feared this deeply. The fire that kept them alive could also destroy everything they owned. To leave the house with the fire unattended was a risk few dared. Experts today still discuss whether the air inside such dwellings was more harmful from cold or from smoke. The lack of proper ventilation meant constant exposure to soot and ash. Many lungs must have carried the memory of that darkness for years, but those who lived through it would tell you that a smoky breath was better than no breath at all. As the fire strengthens, the frost begins to melt. Droplets slide down the walls and gather in the corners. The smell of wet earth rises as the door warms. You wipe moisture from the inside of the window and peer out. The snow outside glows pale gold under the weak morning Sunday. You can see the prints of animals crossing the yard, sharp and fresh. Life continues, quiet and determined. Inside, the warmth spreads slowly. The air softens. You can feel your muscles relax as you sit near the fire, letting it dry the damp edges of your blanket. The sound of crackling wood becomes a rhythm that fills the space, steady and reassuring. Some villagers believed that keeping a steady fire was a form of prayer, a way to honor the life within the house. If the flame burned through the night, it meant the home was blessed. To let it die completely was to invite cold spirits. You do not know whether such beliefs are true, but as you watch the flames grow, you understand why they lasted. The light feels like protection. The others begin to stir. Someone yawns, another coughs. A child crawls from beneath the covers and runs toward the hearth, holding out small hands. The glow touches their face, and they smile without realizing it. The warmth is enough to make the whole room seem alive again. You add another stick to the fire, watching as sparks rise and twist in the smoky air. The faint smell of thawing frost mixes with the scent of wood and straw. For the first time in many hours, you feel something like comfort. The cold is still there, waiting beyond the walls, but inside this small space, you've carved out a circle of light, fragile and human. When the darkness returns, it brings something quieter than cold. You lie still, wrapped in the heavy layers of wool and smoke, and listen to the slow, even breathing around you. Everyone else is asleep, yet the air feels uneasy, filled with the kind of silence that makes you notice your own heartbeat. You stare into the faint glow of the fire, and your mind begins to wander into places where reason does not always follow. In the medieval world, the night was never only a time for rest. It was a time for spirits, dreams, and divine tests. The people who lived in these small cottages believed that while the body slept, the soul roamed freely. Dreams were not random flickers of thought, but messages sent by forces both holy and unholy. You might wake sweating from a nightmare and believe that something in the dark had touched you. Writings from medieval sermons reveal how deeply people feared the dangers of sleep. The night was described as the devil's hour, when temptation and weakness crept into the heart. Priests warned their congregations to pray before bed, to cross themselves before closing their eyes. Sleep was a surrender, a moment when the spirit left the body vulnerable. At the same time, dreams were also windows to the divine. Monks and mystics recorded visions seen in their sleep, believing that angels or saints spoke to them through symbols. Even among peasants, stories spread of dreams that foretold weather, sickness, or death. A person who dreamed of black water might lose a loved one. One who dreamed of clear fire might live through a hard winter. It was all connected, a nightly dialogue between heaven and earth. Curiously, a few rural accounts describe the custom of leaving a small bowl of water or bread by the hearth before bed. It was said to satisfy wandering spirits or the souls of the recently dead, keeping them from disturbing the sleepers. The gesture was both practical and spiritual, a way to acknowledge what could not be controlled. You picture yourself placing a bowl near the fading fire now, just to be safe. There are still disagreements among scholars about whether medieval people truly believed dreams had supernatural power, or whether such stories were simply moral lessons repeated by priests. But as you lie here in the dark, listening to the wind scrape against the walls, belief feels more natural than disbelief. The unseen world feels close, just beyond the firelight. The sounds of the cottage change as the night deepens. The crackle of the fire fades until only the faint hiss of cooling ash remains. You hear someone shift in their sleep, murmuring a few unintelligible words. Maybe they are dreaming. Maybe they are answering something only they can hear. The cow gives a low groan, restless in her corner. The air itself seems to thicken with whispers. You close your eyes, and behind your eyelids, colors and shapes begin to swim. It is easy to imagine how people once thought dreams were journeys of the soul. The mind drifts away from the body, carried by the faint hum of wind and the rhythmic breathing of those beside you. You see faces, strange landscapes, perhaps even familiar voices calling from somewhere far away. A text from the early 15th century mentions that those who died in their sleep were said to have been taken gently by angels, while those who struggled or cried out were thought to be claimed by darker forces. It is a haunting idea, yet comforting too. Death, after all, was never distant here. The line between sleeping and dying was so thin that one could slip across without warning. Oddly enough, some peasants believed that if you woke suddenly from a nightmare, it was because your soul had not yet returned to your body. You were supposed to sit up slowly, whisper your name 3 times, and touch the ground to remind your spirit where home was. You imagine doing this now, your fingers brushing the cold dirt floor, feeling grounded again in the weight of your own body. Outside, the wind moans through the cracks of the thatch. It sounds almost like a voice, calling low and mournful. You pull the blanket closer to your chest, telling yourself it is only the wind. Yet part of you listens more closely, half hoping to hear meaning in it. People once said that the dead could speak through the winter air, seeking warmth or memory. Perhaps they were only stories, but in the middle of the night, stories feel real enough. You turn your gaze back to the fire. The embers pulse faintly, red and gold, like a slow heartbeat. The light flickers against the wall and reveals faint shapes in the smoke. You blink, and they vanish, leaving only the dance of shadows. The room feels alive, full of invisible movement, the thin boundary between waking and dreaming stretched to its limit. Researchers who study medieval culture often point out how intertwined religion and superstition were in daily life. The villagers who crossed themselves before bed were the same ones who nailed horse skulls into walls for protection or whispered charms against bad dreams. Faith and fear existed side by side, each reinforcing the other. You can feel that truth now, heavy in the air. As your thoughts begin to drift again, you find comfort in the sounds of life around you. A faint cough, the creak of wood, the slow rhythm of breath. The darkness feels less like a threat and more like a vast, quiet presence that holds you gently. You realize that for all their fears, the people of this world also found a strange peace in the night. You let your eyes close once more. The air smells of smoke and wool and faintly of the herbs hung above your head. The sound of the wind softens, and your body sinks into the straw. Perhaps you dream, perhaps you simply rest, caught between the worlds of light and dark. Either way, the fear dissolves into something deeper, the calm that comes from accepting the night as it is. When you wake again, the fire is already crackling and the scent of cooking fills the air. Someone has stirred before you, kneeling beside the hearth, stirring a pot with slow, steady motions. The smell of barley and smoke mingles with something faintly sweet, maybe dried fruit or honey, though it is hard to tell. The warmth draws you closer, and your stomach begins to growl softly, reminding you that food here is as precious as warmth. The first meal of the day is rarely a feast. It is simple, sometimes little more than a thick porridge of grains boiled in water or milk, if milk is available. In winter, when stores run low, the mixture might include dried peas, oats, or even a little ale instead of milk. People eat to survive, not to enjoy. Still, after a night in the cold, even this humble dish feels like comfort itself. Evidence from surviving manor accounts and household records shows that peasants relied heavily on grains, cabbage, beans, and occasional bits of salted meat. Bread was often coarse and dense, made from barley or rye rather than wheat. Most food was prepared over the open hearth, with few utensils and even fewer spices. The same pot might serve for cooking, boiling laundry, and mixing feed for animals. The flavor of smoke became the flavor of life itself. An interesting detail recorded by a traveller in the 14th century describes how peasants often let their ale turn slightly sour, using it as both drink and medicine. Mixed into porridge or soups, it added calories and a faint tang of fermentation. Even children drank it, since the water from nearby wells was often unsafe. It sounds strange now, but in this world, small habits meant survival. You sit beside the fire and accept a wooden bowl filled to the brim. The porridge steams, releasing a faint hiss. It is thick and uneven, but the warmth of it spreads quickly through you. You take a small bite, feeling the rough texture of grains between your teeth. It is bland but satisfying. The heat seeps into your chest, easing the stiffness of the cold. Across the room, others begin to eat in silence. There is not much to talk about in the early hours, only the quiet gratitude of still being alive. The firelight flickers across faces lined by wind and work. No one rushes. Meals here are part ritual, part pause before labor begins again. Old proverbs from rural Europe often linked food and sleep, claiming that what you ate decided how you dreamed. Heavy meals were said to bring dark or confusing dreams, while simple, clean food kept the spirit light. In some villages, people avoided certain foods before bed, like onions or fish, believing they invited bad visions. Others drank a small cup of warm ale before sleeping to bring calmness. Whether these ideas held truth or not, they gave structure to a world where mystery was constant. Researchers today still discuss how medieval diets affected rest. Some argue that the lack of rich fats and sugars made sleep more fragmented, while others believe that the rhythm of daylight and labor mattered far more than diet. Whatever the case, hunger was the most common sleep thief. No one dreams well on an empty stomach. As you finish your bowl, you notice the faint hiss of the pot as it cools beside the fire. The smell of oats lingers in the air, heavy and comforting. Someone pours a little ale into a cup, hands it to you, and you take a sip. The drink is sour and warm, with a yeasty bite. It burns slightly in your throat, then spreads through you like a second kind of heat. The idea of food as protection is old here. Before sleeping, some families would share a few mouthfuls of porridge or warm milk, believing it anchored the body against the chill of night. Others placed a crust of bread near the hearth as an offering to whatever unseen force kept the fire burning. These gestures blended faith and gratitude, small acts of hope disguised as routine. You look around the room and realize how everything here revolves around the rhythm of hunger and warmth. The day begins with food, ends with fire, and in between, there is work. You can almost feel the rhythm in your own body, waking, eating, laboring, sleeping. The cycles are simple but powerful. Each act sustains the next. In one corner, a child licks the wooden spoon clean. The motion is so innocent that it breaks through the dullness of routine. You find yourself smiling faintly. Small joys exist here, quiet and ordinary, hidden inside daily struggle. The sweetness of a scrap of honey, the warmth of the bowl in your hands, the sound of wood popping in the fire. These are luxuries in disguise. When the meal is done, the bowls are rinsed with a little water and left near the fire to dry. The smell of cooking fades, replaced once again by smoke and wool. The others begin to prepare for the day, wrapping layers of clothing against the chill. You sit for a moment longer, staring into the embers, thinking about how food and sleep are bound together here like twin gifts. Some historians suggest that medieval peasants, despite their hardships, knew a kind of balance we have forgotten. They ate slowly, worked with rhythm, and accepted sleep as part of the natural order rather than something to conquer. Life was not easy, but it was whole. You can sense that truth as you rise and feel the warmth of the fire still lingering in your hands. Outside, Faint sunlight filters through the frost-covered window. The world beyond the walls waits, white and silent. You take a deep breath, feeling the last taste of porridge still on your tongue, and realize that in this tiny room, life continues with quiet determination. Warmth, food, sleep, simple things that keep the human spirit alive even in the longest winter. The days pass, and winter settles into its heaviest silence. The light outside weakens until morning and evening seem to blur together, and time becomes something measured not by clocks but by how long the fire lasts. This is January, the cruelest month, when fuel grows scarce and tempers grow short. Inside the cottage, you can feel that strain, quiet but constant, like the pressure of ice against wood. The fire has been smaller each night. What was once a pile of solid logs is now a collection of twigs and scraps scavenged from hedges. You watch as someone places a small bundle of dried dung on the embers, and though the smell makes you wince, it catches easily. The flame sputters but stays alive. You can see relief in every face. Even the faintest heat means survival. According to village records preserved in a few monasteries, January was the time when families came closest to starvation. The food stores laid aside in autumn grew thin, and fuel was harder to find. Some peasants stripped bark from trees or gathered dead brambles from frozen fields. It was back-breaking work just to keep a spark alive. Yet the act of tending a fire, however small, became a symbol of endurance. Curiously, there are tales from parts of northern France describing how villagers would take turns guarding one another's fires when wood was scarce. They carried embers in clay pots from house to house, so no family had to risk the night without warmth. The sharing of flame was seen as an act of friendship stronger than any oath. To refuse it was to declare enmity. You can imagine the glow of a single coal carried through the snow, a fragile light against the frozen dark. Inside your own small room, you can feel the cold pressing harder each night. Frost forms on the inside of the door. The straw mattress feels stiff beneath you, brittle with frozen damp. Your breath hangs in the air above your face before vanishing into the smoke. The air smells sharper now, thinner somehow, as if even the scent of warmth is running out. Historians who study peasant life note that January often brought a kind of quiet desperation to the countryside. Work in the field stopped, and people turned inward, repairing tools, spinning wool, or simply enduring the hours. Arguments flared more easily, and silence often settled afterward. The world outside was white and empty, so all the noise and heat of life gathered under the same low roof. You can sense that tension now. Someone sighs in frustration when the last bit of bread is divided. Another snaps at a restless child, then immediately softens, drawing them close for warmth. It is not anger so much as weariness, the exhaustion of surviving day after day with little change. The walls feel smaller, the air feels heavy, even the fire seems to burn more reluctantly. A record from an English parish mentions that villagers believed the cold of January tested the soul. To lose patience during these weeks was to invite misfortune. Families prayed together at night, asking for calm minds and steady hands. You picture them, sitting around the same kind of weak flame that warms you now, voices low and tired but still joined in hope. Sometimes the wind grows so strong that it makes the house tremble. Snow sifts down through cracks in the thatch, landing softly on the blankets. No one moves to brush it away. It melts quickly from the heat of breathing. The world outside might as well not exist. For days at a time, the paths to neighboring houses disappear, and people wait for a thaw to bring back sound and color. Researchers still discuss how such long confinement shaped the bonds within families. Some say it drew them closer, forcing cooperation and shared care. Others believe it bred resentment and quiet loneliness. You can feel both in this room, woven together like threads in a single cloth. Everyone depends on everyone else, and yet everyone dreams, secretly, of space and sunlight. One night, a small piece of the roof cracks under the weight of snow. You hear the noise and jolt awake. Cold air rushes in through the new gap, and for a moment the fire flickers dangerously low. Then hands move quickly, stuffing rags and straw into the hole, patching it with trembling fingers. No one speaks until the warmth returns, weak but steady. The fear passes, but it leaves its mark in the silence afterward. A curious entry in an old farmer's calendar notes that during the hardest winters, people marked the days by counting how many nights' worth of wood remained. 5 fires left, one might say, meaning 5 nights of warmth before the house fell cold. You can feel that same calculation in your mind now, unspoken but constant. Every log, every twig, becomes a kind of currency. Yet amid all this hardship, there are small moments of beauty. In the early morning, when frost covers every surface inside the room, the light from the hearth catches on it and makes the walls sparkle like glass. The air glows with soft gold, and for a heartbeat, it looks like a palace. Even in poverty, the world finds ways to offer grace. You sit quietly, watching the frost melt as the fire warms again. The sound of dripping water fills the silence. The others begin to stir, their faces pale and drawn but still calm. The cold has not broken them yet. You realize that endurance here is not about strength but patience, a slow defiance against a world that tries to freeze you in place. Outside, the snow continues to fall, soft and endless. Inside, the fire burns low but steady, a small sun in a dark season. You close your eyes and let the faint warmth touch your skin. For now, it is enough. You have survived another night, another dawn, another heartbeat in the longest winter of all. Night returns again, slow and heavy, and the little cottage sinks into its familiar rhythm. The fire burns low, but someone must always stay near it, watching, feeding it, protecting it from the hunger of the dark. In a house this fragile, a single mistake can turn comfort into disaster. The watcher's duty is quiet but sacred, to keep the flame alive through the coldest hours when the wind prowls outside like a patient thief. You rise from your bed of straw and take your place by the hearth. The warmth reaches only a few feet, fading quickly into the surrounding chill. You wrap a cloak around your shoulders and listen to the sounds of sleep behind you. The breathing of the others is soft and steady. The animals shift occasionally, hooves thudding faintly on the ground. The night is peaceful now, but peace here is never permanent. Records from household manuals of the period describe how many families assigned a nightly guardian, usually the oldest who could not work in the fields, or the youngest strong enough to stay awake. Their job was to keep the embers glowing, to guard against thieves or hungry wolves, and to make sure no spark leapt into the straw. The task carried quiet honor. A home without a watcher risked waking to ruin. In some regions, villagers believed that the fire itself was alive, a spirit that must not be left alone. If it died in the night, misfortune would enter through the chimney. To please this spirit, a few grains of salt might be thrown into the flames before bed. You do this now, and the salt crackles, sending a shower of sparks upward like tiny stars. The warmth of the fire draws you into a kind of trance. The orange light flickers against your hands, making them look older than they are. Your thoughts wander as you poke at the embers, listening to the faint crackle of wood. The cottage feels like a world of its own, the outside frozen into silence. Inside, everything depends on this one glowing heart. From time to time, you hear the wind pressing against the door. It moans softly through the cracks. A sound so human it makes you glance over your shoulder. You tighten the rope that keeps the door shut, checking the wooden bar that serves as a lock. Then you settle again near the fire, drawing your knees up to your chest. The warmth against your face feels like a blessing. Accounts from monasteries note that villagers often spoke with the fire as though it were an old friend. They whispered their worries into the flames, hoping the light would carry them upward to the heavens. Some even believed that if the fire burned bright during the night, it meant their prayers had been heard. It is easy to see why such beliefs endured. In the middle of winter, faith and fire look much the same. Oddly enough, travellers' journals from the 15th century tell of homes where the watcher sang softly to stay awake. These songs were not grand hymns, but simple, repetitive melodies, half lullaby, half prayer. You hum quietly now, a low tune that matches the rhythm of the crackling wood. The sound settles your nerves, blending into the breathing of those asleep. There is still some debate among historians about how formal these watching rituals truly were. Some think they were acts of necessity shaped into customs. Others believe they held deep symbolic meaning. Either way, the night watcher became a figure of quiet resilience, the one who faced darkness while others dreamed. The hours crawl slowly. You feed the fire small sticks, careful not to wake anyone. Each time you stir the embers, a wave of heat washes over you, followed by a faint sigh as the wood catches. Outside, snow slips from the roof with a soft thud. The sound startles a hen, which clucks drowsily and settles again. You smile despite yourself. Even fear becomes gentle in the rhythm of this place. In the far corner, an old man coughs in his sleep. You glance over and see him turn on his side, mumbling something you cannot make out. The child beside him stirs but does not wake. The faint glow from the fire paints their faces in soft light. And for a moment, the room looks like a painting tired faces, rough walls, a single thread of warmth holding them together. A curious custom from certain alpine villages described the watcher placing a burning log upright in the ashes at midnight. The way it fell or stood by dawn was said to predict fortune for the coming year. You imagine doing the same now, tilting a small piece of wood upright and watching as it burns slowly down. Superstition or not, it gives meaning to the endless hours. Your eyes grow heavy, and you fight to stay awake. The warmth is hypnotic. You rub your eyes, shift your weight, and whisper a few words to yourself. To fall asleep would be dangerous. The fire could die, or worse, spread. Yet the body, after days of labor, begs for rest. You steady yourself by staring into the light, following its slow movement until your thoughts blur. The fire makes tiny sounds as it burns, soft clicks, sighs, and the occasional sharp pop. Each one feels like a heartbeat. You focus on those sounds, keeping yourself anchored. Slowly, the first grey light of dawn begins to slip through the window. You realize you have made it through another night. The house is still standing. The fire is still alive. The people behind you are still breathing. You stretch and place another small piece of wood onto the embers. The flame rises again, stronger now. The sound of morning is beginning, the cough of someone waking, the low murmur of animals stirring, the shifting of straw. You feel the tired ache of sleeplessness, but also a quiet pride. You kept the light alive. In this world, that is enough to count as victory. When the sun sinks below the horizon, the cold deepens, and with it comes a sense of watchfulness. The darkness outside feels heavier than usual, pressing close against the walls. The door, little more than a wooden plank tied with rope, is all that separates you from the world beyond. Inside, the fire flickers softly, and everyone moves with a kind of cautious quiet, aware that the night does not always stay friendly. In the medieval countryside, darkness was not simply an absence of light, but a living thing, full of noise and threat. Villagers barred their doors at dusk, and trusted the fire to keep away both the cold and the unknown. A latch made from wood, a bar across the frame, even a bench pushed tight against the door. These were defenses as important as swords. The mind learned to listen for danger. Old records and court documents reveal how theft and small crimes often rose in winter. Hunger drove desperate men to risk sneaking into cottages while their neighbors slept. Most stole food or fuel, though sometimes worse followed. Families placed whatever furniture they owned against the entrance, making a barricade of benches, baskets, and barrels. You can almost feel the tension in that ritual, the quiet urgency as hands check the latch one last time before everyone settles in. Curiously, a few village traditions from Eastern Europe describe people drawing protective symbols on their doors with chalk or ashes before sleeping. It was thought to keep out evil or wandering spirits that might slip through when the world was frozen still. A cross, A circle, or even a simple star could serve as a shield. You imagine the faint chalk marks glowing in the dim firelight, a fragile promise of safety. The sounds outside are unpredictable. Sometimes only the sighing wind and the soft fall of snow, other times the distant bark of dogs or the low creak of a tree bent under ice. Every so often, a sharper sound carries across the night, a cracking branch or the echo of a hoof on the frozen path, and everyone in the cottage stops breathing for a heartbeat. Then, when nothing follows, life resumes. The fear does not vanish, but it settles. There are stories about those who wandered after dark despite the danger. Some were night watchmen hired by lords to patrol manors and villages, carrying lanterns that barely pierced the dark. Others were travelers too poor to afford shelter, moving from house to house seeking warmth. The peasants inside listened to their footsteps and whispered prayers that they would pass by. To open the door could be kindness or catastrophe. A note in a 13th century parish chronicle mentions a family who shared their bed with a passing pilgrim on a freezing night. By morning, the man was gone, leaving behind only his staff and a small pouch of coins. Some said he was a saint testing their charity. Others swore it was a thief who changed his mind. Such stories blur the line between danger and blessing. You think of that as you look toward your own door, wondering what footsteps might be crossing the snow outside tonight. Scholars have long discussed how the fear of the night shaped the moral life of these villages. Safety depended not just on strength but on reputation. A house known for kindness might receive protection from neighbors, while a selfish family could find itself isolated when danger came. The darkness was both test and teacher, reminding everyone that survival depended on one another. Inside your cottage, the mood is watchful but calm. Someone whispers a short prayer near the fire, words worn smooth by repetition. The child curls closer to their mother, clutching the hem of her cloak. You shift a heavy bench against the door, feeling its weight press into the frame. It is a poor lock, but it gives the illusion of control. The night stretches on. The wind rises, carrying flakes of snow through unseen cracks. The fire glows low, painting everything in shades of orange and shadow. You can smell the faint scent of burning peat, the same smoky perfume that fills every winter night. It clings to hair, skin, and clothing, a reminder that safety has a cost. There is an old superstition that says you should never let the fire die before midnight, for the dark hours belong to wandering souls. Whether you believe it or not, you reach for another piece of wood and lay it gently on the embers. The flame catches slowly, then flares, and you feel the air shift, as though the house itself sighs in relief. Outside, the sounds continue. A dog howls somewhere far off. Perhaps it has caught the scent of a fox, or perhaps it cries simply to remind the living that it is still there. The sound lingers in the air, long and mournful. The cow in the corner stirs and snorts softly. You move closer to the fire, letting its warmth steady your heart. Travelers' journals from this period sometimes describe the eerie stillness of winter nights in rural Europe. The snow muffled every sound until even a single footstep seemed to echo for miles. Those who lived within the walls of their cottages learned to recognize every creak and whisper of wood. In the silence, the mind played tricks, turning wind into whispers, shadows into figures. You stare at the door again, the faint frost on its edges glinting in the firelight. You wonder what the villagers told themselves to keep fear at bay. Perhaps they spoke of angels walking the roads, or perhaps they simply prayed and trusted the strength of the bar. Whatever they believed, it worked. The centuries passed, and the world kept turning. Eventually, fatigue wins over vigilance. The last sounds you hear before sleep are the steady crackle of the fire and the soft rustle of straw. The bench stays firm against the door. The night presses closer, curious but kept at bay. You close your eyes knowing that in this fragile balance between fear and warmth, you have made your small peace with the dark. Morning comes slowly, like a candle burning through thick wax. You open your eyes to the sound of coughing. It is deep, wet, and unrelenting. The air in the cottage feels heavy, thick with smoke, and the sour smell of illness. You sit up and see that the fire has burned low again, barely more than a red shimmer beneath the ash. The cold presses in, sharp and steady, and every breath feels like a small battle. The winter sickness has arrived. It moves quietly through the village each year, finding its way into lungs already weakened by smoke and cold. In a single-room home, there is no escaping it. The same air that warms you also traps every cough and every sigh. A single illness becomes a house guest that refuses to leave. Records from medieval hospitals and parish notes describe these common winter ailments in detail. Chills that turn to fever, coughs that rattle through the night, aches that settle into the bones. The causes were poorly understood. Some blamed the cold air itself, others the foul smoke that filled every house. A few said it was God's way of testing endurance. Whatever the reason, most families faced it with quiet resignation. Curiously, old remedies often mixed prayer with simple household ingredients. A mixture of honey and vinegar might be brewed for sore throats. Onion boiled with milk was thought to drive sickness from the chest. Charms were whispered over cups of ale, and herbs were burned to cleanse the air. The logic was a blend of medicine and magic, both given equal faith. You watch as a woman near the hearth ladles out a thin broth into a wooden bowl. The sick man beside her lifts his head with effort, eyes half closed. She presses the bowl into his hands, murmuring softly. The steam rises around them, carrying the faint scent of herbs, sage perhaps, or thyme. The sound of the man's coughing fills the space, echoing off the low ceiling. The fire, weak as it is, remains the house's only healer. Its warmth dries the air and gives a fragile comfort to aching bodies. People here believe that keeping close to the flame helps sweat out the sickness. You can see the sheen of perspiration on the old man's face, the way his breathing eases slightly as the heat reaches him. Chroniclers from the time often wrote that death in winter felt gentler, wrapped in the quiet of snow and firelight. Yet there is nothing peaceful about the waiting. The family moves in slow rhythm, tending to the sick while continuing their chores. The cow still needs feeding, the straw still needs shaking, and the fire must never die. Grief, like cold, becomes part of the daily air. Researchers today still argue about how peasants balance superstition and knowledge in their care for the ill. Some insist that herbal practices passed down through generations were surprisingly effective, rooted in observation. Others see them as desperate guesses made in a world without doctors. You suspect both are true. Necessity sharpens intuition. The smell of sickness lingers in the room, mixed with the sour tang of boiled herbs. Someone opens the small window to let in a bit of air. A gust of cold sweeps through, making everyone shiver. For a moment, frost forms again on the edges of the walls, but the freshness feels good. The air clears slightly, though the smoke quickly fills it again. You sit quietly, watching the family move around the fire. The woman wipes the sick man's forehead with a damp cloth. The child nearby plays with a piece of straw, too young to understand why everyone speaks in whispers. The cow shifts, hooves thudding softly. Life continues, even as illness lingers. A few strange practices survive in old medical texts. Some people believed that sleeping with a piece of iron beneath the bed would draw the sickness out of the body. Others placed slices of raw onion under the straw mattress to absorb bad air. One curious account from Wales describes a ritual of walking around the house 3 times at dusk to confuse the spirit of disease so it could not find its way back inside. None of it makes sense by modern reason, yet each gesture carries the same wish: to protect, to heal, to endure. You can feel the heat of the fire on your hands now, stronger as more fuel is added. The light paints the faces of those gathered around it, showing the lines of fatigue and the quiet strength behind it. The room smells of smoke and broth and earth. You realize that, in its way, this is medicine too. The nearness of others, the rhythm of shared care. No one faces sickness alone here. At last, the coughing fades. The old man drifts into sleep, his breathing rough but steadier. The woman sits beside him, watching the fire. Her face glows in the light, calm and weary. She crosses herself once, then leans back against the wall. The child curls up beside her, head on her lap. Outside, the wind moves softly through the frozen trees. The night presses close again, but the fire burns steady now, its light a quiet defiance against everything that threatens to enter. Inside the cottage, illness still lingers, but so does warmth and faith and the steady sound of life. You close your eyes and listen. The breathing around you is uneven but alive. The fire hums. The smell of herbs lingers like a faint promise. Perhaps by morning the fever will have broken, perhaps not. But for now, the night holds you all in its fragile calm, and the rhythm of survival continues, heartbeat by heartbeat. The days blend together, cold and smoky, until one morning you wake to a sound that feels different from the usual rhythm of breath and fire. It is the cry of a newborn, thin and sharp, cutting through the quiet. The sound fills the room, startling the animals and sending a ripple of movement through the sleeping bodies. You sit up and see the mother near the hearth, wrapped in blankets, her face pale but calm. A midwife crouches beside her, steady hands moving with the ease of long practice. In this small house, there is no space set apart for birth or death. Every event happens in the same room where meals are eaten, where bodies sleep, where fires burn. The straw that cradled your dreams last night now serves as bedding for new life. The air is thick with heat and smoke, and the scent of sweat and blood mixes with the smell of ash. It is not a holy chamber or a sterile place. It is the heart of the home, raw and real. Records from medieval parish accounts often mention births taking place by the hearth. The warmth of the fire was considered essential, not only for the child's survival but for the mother's strength. In many households, a pot of water simmered nearby to wash the newborn, the same pot that only hours earlier had been used for porridge or broth. There were no midwife bags, no linen sheets, only hands, rags, and courage. Curiously, in some rural communities, it was believed that a baby born in winter carried the blessing of endurance. Cold-born children, people said, grew strong and patient, like the earth itself. The midwife might whisper a short prayer over the infant, asking the fire to lend its warmth and the snow to lend its purity. You imagine her voice now, low and steady, mingling with the soft crackle of the flames. There is a kind of reverence in the stillness that follows. The baby's cries fade to quiet murmurs, as it is wrapped in wool and pressed against the mother's chest. The others in the room look on silently, faces lined with fatigue and wonder. Even the animals seem subdued, their sounds softer than usual. Life and warmth feel intertwined in a way that makes the cold outside seem distant. Historians who study daily life in medieval villages note that childbirth was both routine and sacred. It was common enough to be familiar, yet dangerous enough to inspire awe. Each successful birth felt like a small miracle, a triumph against the odds. There were no guarantees, no promises, only endurance and faith. A detail from a 15th century midwife's manual describes how women hung herbs like rosemary, fennel, and juniper near the bed to ward off sickness and evil spirits. The same herbs used in cooking or burned in the fire for scent now became symbols of protection. Sometimes, a piece of iron, such as a knife or key, was placed under the bed to keep dark forces away from mother and child. You glance around the cottage and notice such small items everywhere, objects of necessity turned into quiet charms. As the morning light strengthens, the midwife washes her hands and sits back, satisfied. The new mother leans her head against the wall, eyes half closed, while the baby sleeps in her arms. Around them, the cottage returns to its rhythm. Someone feeds the fire, another stirs the pot. Life moves forward as if nothing extraordinary has happened, even though something entirely extraordinary just has. Later that evening, when the baby fusses, a lullaby rises from one of the older children, soft and wavering. It is a song you have heard before, words about angels keeping watch through the night. The tune floats above the crackle of the fire and settles into the air like smoke. The newborn quiets, soothed by the sound, and the room feels full again, not just of bodies, but of meaning. And yet, just as life enters, death is never far. In another corner of the same village, perhaps even the same street, someone else exhales for the last time. The parish clerks write both events side by side in the same register, as if they belong to the same story. The circle of warmth continues, indifferent to beginnings and endings. Some researchers have suggested that this intimacy with birth and death gave medieval peasants a deeper understanding of life's fragility. There was no distance, no illusion of control. Everything happened within arm's reach of the fire. You can feel that truth now, as you watch the baby's small fingers curl and uncurl in sleep. The same heat that keeps it alive will one day cremate the last embers of someone else's body. As the night deepens, the mother dozes, her breathing slow and even. The midwife sits beside her, humming softly. The others have drifted to sleep as well, their bodies curled in familiar shapes. The room smells faintly of milk and smoke, of life renewed. You sit quietly, watching the fire burn steady and golden. For the first time in many nights, the cold feels far away. There is a peace in this moment that does not come often in winter. The fire glows gently, the air hums with warmth, and the soft sounds of sleep fill the space. You realize that this is what all the labor and struggle of peasant life are, for not wealth, not comfort, but moments like this, when survival turns into something almost sacred. Outside, the wind drifts across the snow, carrying no threat tonight. Inside, the newborn sighs in its sleep, and you close your eyes, letting that sound carry you into dreams. The night feels softer, kinder, as if for a little while even the cold has agreed to wait. When the snow finally begins to melt, it happens quietly at first. A faint drip from the roof, a small trickle along the wall, the smell of damp earth creeping into the room. You wake to that sound, unsure if it is real or a dream. Then you notice the light through the window is brighter, less grey, and the air feels softer on your skin. The long winter is beginning to loosen its hold. You step outside for the first time in many days. The ground is still hard, but patches of brown show through the snow. The air carries a wet, clean scent. You can hear birds again, faint but unmistakable, their songs shaky as if they too are surprised to find the sun returning. The village looks tired, roofs sagging under old snow, fences half buried, but everything breathes again. Inside the cottage, the mood changes. People move more easily, speak more freely. The fire is smaller now, used sparingly to save what little fuel remains. Instead of huddling around it all day, the family opens the door to let in air and light. Smoke clears more quickly, and for the first time in months, the space feels alive again. Historical weather records and manorial accounts describe the early spring thaw as both a relief and a challenge. Meltwater turned roads to mud, roofs leaked, and supplies were often nearly gone before the first crops could grow. But the light itself seemed to heal something in the spirit. People stepped outside with their faces turned upward, blinking in the sudden brightness, half laughing, half weeping. Curiously, there were small rituals to welcome the thaw. In some parts of England, villagers would strike the ground with sticks to wake it, a symbolic gesture to stir life from its sleep. Others carried embers from their home fires to the fields, believing that the warmth of the hearth could encourage the soil to live again. It is easy to imagine those gestures now, simple, hopeful, and filled with gratitude. The animals sense the change before anyone else. The cow shakes her head and sniffs the air. The hens scratch eagerly at the softening floor. Even the pig seems restless, ready to explore the yard again. Their movements fill the house with energy, a pulse of life that has been missing during the long stillness of winter. You help sweep the floor, shaking out old straw, and replacing it with fresh, golden hay from the small pile that survived the season. The act feels ceremonial. Dust rises and sunlight catches it, turning the air to gold. For months, every sound has been muffled by frost, every breath thick with smoke. Now, the world feels lighter, freer. A monk's journal from the 12th century describes this time of year as the earth's first exhale. He wrote that when the ice broke and the rivers ran again, even the tired old walls of his monastery seemed to hum with joy. You understand that feeling. The drip of melting snow outside sounds like music, slow and rhythmic, as though the land itself is waking from a dream. There is still hardship, of course. The larder is nearly empty. The bread has turned hard, and what remains of the salted meat tastes more of brine than nourishment. Yet no one complains. Hunger feels different when there is light. It becomes bearable, almost hopeful. You know that soon there will be green shoots in the garden and fish moving in the streams again. Researchers who study rural life point out that the first weeks of spring were often the most dangerous for peasants. Starvation, not cold, claimed more lives during the thaw. Food ran out before crops could be planted, and animals weakened by winter sometimes died just before grazing returned. Yet hope carried people forward. The promise of warmth was stronger than fear. You help carry a pail of water from the stream outside. It runs clear for the first time in months, cold and bright as glass. The sound of it pouring into the bucket is pure and clean, washing away the weight of winter. Back inside, steam rises as it warms near the hearth. The smell of damp straw and earth fills the room, and everyone breathes more deeply, as if trying to draw spring into their lungs. Children play near the doorway, watching drops fall from the thatch. Each one glitters before it hits the ground. They laugh and try to catch them on their tongues. You watch them and feel something stir in your chest, something almost forgotten. It is the feeling of possibility. The world no longer feels like an endless cage of frost, but a place that might forgive. In some villages, there was a saying that the first day you could hear running water was the day the heart began to thaw too. Maybe that is true. You can feel warmth creeping back into your thoughts, soft and slow. The long nights of hunger and smoke begin to fade from memory. The cold no longer feels like an enemy, but like an old teacher who has finally finished the lesson. The fire crackles softly, burning less fiercely now but more brightly. Its smoke rises straight up through the vent in the roof, carried cleanly by the warmer air. You sit near it one last time before stepping out again. The wind is cold, but gentle. The ground smells alive. And far away, someone is singing a rough, wordless tune carried by the breeze. You close your eyes for a moment and let the sound wash over you. The sun rests lightly on your face. It is not strong yet, but it is enough to make you believe that the world, for all its hardship, always finds its way back to life. The snow continues to melt, and each drop that falls feels like a promise whispered to the waiting earth. The thaw continues, and with it comes something older than weather: stories. As the fields soften and the rivers loosen their grip, people begin to talk again, their voices rising like birds returning to their nests. You sit near the fire one evening, listening to the soft murmur of conversation. The tone is different now, lighter. The darkness outside still lingers, but it feels gentler, more curious than cruel. Every village has its own collection of tales about the turning of the seasons. Some are told for comfort, others for warning. Tonight, as the smoke curls toward the roof, an old man begins to speak. His voice is low, rasping, but steady. He tells of the time when winter was not a season but a spirit, a tall figure in rags of frost who wandered the earth, looking for warmth to steal. When people grew lazy or ungrateful, she crept into their homes and blew out their fires with a single breath. Only those who kept their hearths burning with care could survive her passing. Accounts of such winter spirits appear throughout European folklore, recorded later by priests and travellers. They were not quite demons and not quite gods, but something in between, ancient reminders that nature could be both cruel and kind. The stories carried lessons about vigilance, gratitude, and respect for the unseen. The peasants who told them understood that the line between myth and life was thin, especially when one mistake could mean death. Curiously, Some of these tales mixed fear with comfort. In parts of Germany, people spoke of Frau Holle, an old woman who shook out her feather bed to make the snow fall and rewarded those who worked hard through the winter. In the Alps, there was talk of Perchte, a figure who punished the idle but blessed the diligent. The message was always the same: endure, labor, and you will see the spring again. You listen as the old man continues, his words drifting like embers in the air. The children lean closer, wide-eyed. The firelight dances on their faces. When he finishes, silence follows for a moment, broken only by the crackle of wood. Then someone else speaks, telling a story of their own, a tale of a farmer who fell asleep beside his fire and dreamed of a great green meadow, only to wake and find spring had come. The stories ripple through the room, each one carrying a fragment of truth hidden in wonder. Researchers who study folklore often describe these stories as a form of communal therapy. In a world ruled by hardship, people used narrative to make sense of suffering. To tell of spirits and blessings was to give meaning to what could not be controlled. You can feel that healing power in the way the words fill the room, wrapping around everyone like a blanket. As the night deepens, the talk turns softer, almost reverent. Someone mentions the belief that sleep itself was a gift from the earth, a kind of hibernation shared with the soil and animals. When the ground froze, so too did the human spirit. When it thawed, everything living began to dream again. The idea feels comforting, as if even rest were part of a greater rhythm. In one corner, a woman hums an old tune said to awaken the fields. The melody is simple, more a chant than a song. She stirs the ashes of the fire in rhythm with it, her voice low and steady. Others join softly, and soon the room vibrates with quiet harmony. It is not a performance but a prayer, a way to remind the world that they are still here. Ancient fragments of these customs survive in medieval writings. Some chroniclers described spring rituals in which villagers sang or struck the earth with branches, believing the sound would wake the buried seeds. It was not superstition so much as conversation, a dialogue between people and land. You can almost feel the pulse of that old faith as you listen to their voices echo in the small space. The stories drift into talk of dreams. Someone mentions that during the long nights of winter, people often dreamed of warmth fires that never went out, golden fields heavy with grain, bright rivers full of fish. Dreams were omens, they say, messages from the sleeping earth itself. One man claims he dreamed of rain and woke to find frost melting on the roof. Everyone nods, half believing, half knowing it does not matter whether it is true. The story is what keeps them alive. You look around the room and realize that storytelling, more than food or even fire, binds this little world together. It turns fear into memory, hunger into meaning. The words themselves seem to add warmth to the air. You think of all the centuries that have passed since people first gathered like this, speaking light into darkness, making sense of the cold. Outside, the snow continues to retreat, revealing patches of soil that glisten in the moonlight. The air smells of wet bark and thawing ground. The sound of dripping water plays like a slow rhythm against the roof. Inside, the last story fades into silence. The fire burns low, and the faces around it soften into drowsiness. A chronicler once wrote that when peasants spoke of the return of spring, they were really speaking of faith, the belief that no season, however cruel, could last forever. You feel that faith now as you lie down again in the straw. The air is cool, but it no longer bites. The world has shifted, quietly, toward life. You close your eyes, and the echoes of the stories linger. You can still hear the soft hum of the woman's song, the steady rhythm of the dripping roof, the heartbeat of the fire. Somewhere deep in the earth something stirs. You feel it too, the slow awakening of hope. The long winter has not won. The days grow longer now, and the air carries a different sound. The wind no longer whines through cracks, but moves with a gentler voice. The fire still burns at night, but it is no longer the center of every breath. You wake to birds outside, to dripping water, to the faint rhythm of life returning to the world. The house smells of thawing earth instead of smoke. For the first time in months, you can open the door without bracing against the cold. You step outside, and the light feels new. The snow has retreated to small patches along the fence, and beneath it, the soil gleams dark and rich. In the distance, fields that once lay silent begin to stir with movement. People walk the muddy paths, shoulders lighter than before. The sound of a stream carries faint laughter. Inside, the cottage looks softer now. The smoke-stained ceiling still bears the scars of winter, but sunlight has found its way through the window, falling in a golden square across the floor. The straw mattress has been replaced with fresh hay, clean and dry. The animals linger near the doorway, curious about the outside world they had nearly forgotten. The air feels warmer even without fire, as if the walls themselves are sighing with relief. For the peasants who lived through it, this moment was not just about weather. It was a return to rhythm, to movement. Records from medieval villages describe how the end of winter brought festivals, small ones at first, songs, dances, shared bread. People gave thanks not for abundance, which was still far away, but for endurance. They had survived the long night. Curiously, some of those celebrations were rooted in the belief that winter sleep changed people, not only in body, but in spirit. The months of darkness, hunger, and closeness shaped a kind of humility that spring demanded in return. To step back into sunlight was to begin again. In old prayers, people thanked God not for riches but for breath, for light, for the simple gift of waking. The family inside your small cottage feels that too. They speak more often now, laugh more easily. The fire burns smaller each night, but no one fears it fading. The baby born in the heart of winter sleeps quietly in its cradle, round and healthy. The mother hums as she works. Even the old man who coughed through the hardest nights can walk outside to feel the air on his face. The season of stillness has passed. A few historians have written that these months of confinement gave medieval peasants a closeness to one another that modern life rarely knows. In one room, through darkness and fear, they learned to breathe together, to share warmth and silence. The nights taught them the art of endurance, but also the beauty of dependence. No one survived alone. You can sense that truth as you sit by the hearth one last time. The fire is low, its light flickering softly. The smoke rises through the vent in a thin, straight line. Outside, the fields glisten with melting frost. You hear the sound of distant bells, perhaps from the church in the next village marking morning. The sound feels like a benediction. You think about everything that happened in this single room, the cold that bit through the walls, the sickness that passed like shadow, the laughter that broke the silence, the birth that lit the darkness. It was a small world, but within it, every moment mattered. Each breath, each spark, each heartbeat was part of the quiet defiance that kept humanity alive. One chronicle from the 14th century described peasants as the roots of the world. They lived hidden beneath the surface, unseen and uncelebrated, yet they kept the great structure of life standing. You understand now what that meant. They did not endure for glory or reward, but because the earth itself needed them to. The rhythm of sowing, sleeping, and waking was their prayer. You look once more at the fire. Its glow has softened into a red shimmer, gentle as breath. The warmth on your hands feels less like survival and more like memory. Around you, the air hums with quiet promise. Soon the fields will call again, the tools will be lifted, and the rhythm of labor will begin anew. But tonight, for a little while longer, there is only peace. The sounds of evening begin to fade, leaving the soft murmur of wind through the open door. The last of the snow glows faintly under the moonlight. The animals have settled. The baby stirs once, then sighs. You lie down on the fresh straw, listening to the heartbeat of the house, the gentle breathing of those who share it. And now, as the world drifts towards sleep once more, you realize something simple and eternal. Every night, no matter how long, must eventually give way to dawn. The warmth that saved you is still here, waiting in the ashes, in the soil, in the steady rhythm of life that never truly stops. Your eyes grow heavy. The air feels soft, the fire low but alive. You breathe deeply, the scent of spring earth filling your chest. The sound of melting snow becomes your lullaby. For a moment, you feel as though you are part of the earth itself, resting, ready to rise again when morning comes. The fire flickers lower, and your heartbeat begins to match its fading rhythm. Outside, the world is hushed, wrapped in silver light. You can almost feel the pulse of the earth beneath you, slow and steady, the same rhythm that carried peasants through their longest winters. The air tastes of renewal. Breathe in. Let the weight of the cold, the work, the endless nights drift away. Each sound softens now. The last whisper of the fire, the quiet rustle of straw, the sigh of wind along the thatch. You have walked through centuries tonight, felt the bite of frost and the warmth of shared breath. Now, that story closes gently, like a book pressed shut. In your mind, the cottage fades into quiet shadow. The faces of those who lived here dissolve into memory, their warmth still lingering like the glow of embers. You realize they are not gone. They are part of you, part of every small comfort that keeps the world alive. Your breath slows. The air grows softer. The sound of the melting snow becomes steady and distant, like waves. The rhythm of life that once pulsed in that tiny cottage now hums in you. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to hold, only rest. Let your eyelids grow heavy. Let the warmth settle deep into your chest. Somewhere, far off, the sun is rising, pale and kind. The world begins again. You have survived the winter. Sleep well now, traveller. The fire is low, but it will burn again in the morning.